Everyone, thanks for attending, everyone in the room to our board meeting. So we have a few on the phone as well, maybe three. Yep, it's like three. We'll call the meeting to order now because we have a quorum of the board. We had David, Randy, John, and Jens is here too. And Tony, of course. So that gives us a quorum. Are there any board members on the phone call that we just can't identify on the screen? Okay, so that sounds like that's going to be it for tonight. Let's go to public comment on the phones. Carol, you can comment after the meeting if you like. Unless you want to comment now.
Well, I thought we decided public comment was gonna be at the end of this.
Yeah, we've been doing it both, only because we don't want to miss anybody on the phone. So let's take the phone call in.
All right, Joshua Cooperman, I have you as registered. You're unmuted if you can speak.
Hi, this is Josh Cooperman. I live in Louisville. I wanted to make, I guess, 4 brief comments. The first one, I missed last month's meeting where I had hoped to make some comments. And I thought that I would just email my comments to the advisory board. And then I seemed to find that there's no way to email the advisory board. And I was rather surprised since most of the advisory boards and similar bodies that I've encountered seem to have an email contact. So I would just like to recommend that you create an email contact for the airport advisory board. Second comment, 2 months ago, when I made a comment, I asked if the airport has done anything towards decarbonization, towards reducing its carbon footprint, and I didn't get much of a response. In any case, you know, I would like to make a couple little suggestions. You know, the kind of the easiest thing to do is to sign up for one of the Excel programs that gets you renewable energy. Perhaps the airport or some of the tenants already do that. I was looking at just some Google images of the airport from above, and it looks like there are a lot of roofs and space where you could put solar panels. I'm sure some of it is restricted because of the flights, but it seems like there's a lot of space. I'm sure there are other possibilities. The last thing I'd like to suggest is that in the airports, just down the street from the airport in Golden, there are some experts who can advise the airport on precisely this. At the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, they form strategic partnerships with airports and seaports and other things like that. And they work to help you decarbonize your operations. And as I understand, the person to contact there is named Brett Oakleaf. My third comment, I would like to say that I fully endorse the recent petition to the airport from regional medical professionals concerning lead pollution. I would really like to see the airport phase out leaded gasoline. And then my last comment, again, 2 months ago was just before the JSX flights were about to start at the airport. And that's mostly what the meeting was about. I would just like to offer my own perspective. I know that it's only 4 flights per day, but that's 4 more flights. I hope they don't come over Louisville because we have way too many flights over Louisville already. And I'm just wondering, when the airport signed a contract with JSX, did you give consideration to the added noise? It seems like adding more flights is contrary to the goals of the Community Noise Roundtable. Did you give any consideration to the air pollution that those flights would cause? Our air pollution is already pretty bad, and we're about to be downgraded. And again, did you give any considerations to the greenhouse gas emissions that those flights would produce? Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Good. Okay. Everybody have a chance to look at the minutes from August's meeting.
Move to approve.
Oh, okay. Everybody had a chance to look? All right, we have a motion to approve as written. Second,
I'll second that.
okay. Everybody in favor?
All right.
Aye. The centers, it looks like, we all said aye. Thank you. Okay, so we have, from last meeting, those of you that were here, I think most of us were, we're talking about the capital plan for the next 10 years and the prioritization of the different projects. And one of the main ones we're talking about here is runway 321 and its current condition and what it would take to bring it up to, I guess, the standard of reserve right and left. So we have experts with us that are going to talk to us a little bit about the condition of the runway and some of the options for us ahead. Does that sound about right? No?
Right on.
Right on?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Can you introduce yourselves, please, for the audience?
Sure. For the record, I'm Jim Miklas with JVH, the manager of planning.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for being.
Thanks for having us.
I'm Zach Hazard, also with Aviation, also a planner.
I said, thanks. Appreciate it.
And I'm Matt Gilbreth, JVation, I'm engineering project manager.
We see you a couple of times.
Once or twice, maybe.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate your time, your participation here. So I think the floor is yours.
And I'll kick this off.
Oh, you got
Bill.
them? Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we brought Aviation along, as you know, to kind of speak to the condition and the engineering qualities of runway 321, as well as some of the planning considerations we're looking at as well. But before we dive into that, as you guys might know, we sent out an airport-wide survey through our constant contact. So I'm going to briefly go through the results of that,
Did you all receive it?
just to give a context.
Many people never got your survey.
That's what I was just asking
They
around the
called
thing.
me and says, what survey?
Yeah, well, they should call the airport. We could have sent them a link. Then they would have got the survey. So we need to get more people on the constant contact if they're not on there.
Did you get it? I did, yes.
So going through the results, we did get pretty good participation. You know, over 200 people responded. I know we have roughly over 400 based aircraft here and, you know, over almost 200 of our based, flight people, pilots responded to the survey. And kind of, you'll see a lot of these results were kind of what I expected and probably what you would have expected. We got great participation from pilots who are either flying for themselves or flying as part of a flight school or a flight club. I think one of the cool things about this airport particularly is how long people have been flying out of here. Because the question 4, look at how many people have been flying out of the airport for more than 20 years. And, you know, a lot of people who are frequent users of the airport as well, weekly being the biggest respondents. And then, you know, as we know, most of the flights out of here are single engine piston fixed wing aircraft, and that was by far the majority of the responses. Although we even got some helicopter responses as well, which is important because we know they use that runway as well. Typical reasons for flying out of the airport, kind of what we'd expect: flight training, recreation, personal travel. The biggest other response was traveling for business. So then we get to the questions specific to this runway 321, which is what this survey was trying to really help us with. So how often do you use 321 for takeoff or landing? Kind of what we expected, right? The majority of responses less than once per year. The next one was less than once a month. But some people use it weekly. 2 people claim to use it daily. Next question was, what was the primary purpose for using 321? We heard ATC rarely ever gives me the option to use it, so not surprisingly, that was low. But not surprisingly, most of the reason was wind conditions were favorable to use it. You know, some people use it to save on taxi time. I think there'd probably be more use of that if it was able to be used more often. How often does the existence of 321 allow you to land at this airport or operate at this airport when you would not have been able to operate on the primary runways? Some people acknowledge less than once a month or less than once a year were the biggest responses. You know, some people say weekly it allows them to land here or take off here when they otherwise wouldn't have. And then finally, how necessary do you feel it is to have an operable crosswind runway at the airport? Biggest response was very necessary, followed by somewhat necessary. Well, 14% didn't think it was very necessary. And then we had the open-ended responses at the end, and we had 123. I'm not going to go through them all. I kind of tried to categorize a couple typical in each category. So if you see those top two, these were the ones where people, kind of explained why they need it, why they use it. And it's kind of what you'd expect. Sometimes it's the only way to land here for some people. Then in that middle category, we heard a lot of, I wish we could use it more. It's just usually not an option. It's, we're too busy. It's not safe to use that runway because the primary runways are being used so much. And then, the last two comments kind of reflect, if we can't use it, then I just don't really care what happens to it. So those were kind of the bulk of the open-ended responses reflected kind of those top two comments about, that runway is not important until it is, until that day I need it. So that kind of summarized the bulk of the responses. And then that covers the survey results. I guess I'll pause there to see if you have any questions on that.
Then I just have an observation on it. It's interesting that the survey report results show that people infrequently use it, but they feel like, 3/4 of them feel like it's important that it's there.
Yeah.
Which I was a little surprised at that. I guess I would have thought fewer users would have thought that it's important to be there, although going somewhere else to land in unfavorable conditions, nobody wants to do that, but I was just surprised at that.
I think it's important to notice the FAA tower says it's used less than 1.5% of the takeoff and landings, and that's a count from them. Doesn't count hours we're closed, but that's a very low number.
Yeah. It's the old adage about if you ask people what they want versus you measure what they use. And I think this is a prime example. If you say, do you want it? Oh yeah, absolutely. Show me your use. Doesn't quite line up with it. I think that adage holds true in the survey results as well.
If there's no other questions, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and you can speak to the planning terms, or I don't know.
And could you back up a couple charts to show the actual usage of it?
It's number 7.
What are our daily operations, Ben? Do you have it? Just.
Wish I knew that. Yeah, what's 280,000 divided by, or whatever we're at.
To see if the math works, right?
Yeah, hold on a second, I'll get it to you.
We have 68 pilots using it every month,
I mean, even that's
or
1%.
31. That's less than one.
Okay, thank you.
That's probably about right. It's all right. I think it lines up pretty much with the one.
It's like 600 operations daily,
That sounds about right.
that times 0.015. So on average, less than an operation a day if you were to carry it all the way.
Sounds all right.
Yeah.
I think we figured it out, based on operational totals from 2021, 1.5% is about 3,000 annually at most, and with that equation. But even in talking with the tower, and we'll talk more about that here in a second, that 1.5 is probably the high side right now and likely declining based on the other operational upticks you're experiencing, on the airport, just because of the challenge and difficulty of operating that runway.
That get you, Tony?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was just gonna ask, is the survey still open? Are we still trying to get further responses?
I closed it the day before this meeting, so we'd have kind of final results for you all, and we communicated that through a constant contact as well.
How many constant contacts did we send it out to?
I think the airport's list right now is like 1,700 contacts.
So 200 responses aren't that bad.
Yeah, and a lot of those 1,700 are either community members or people who happen to have business out at the airport but never fly out here. So, we had talked about that, about trying to make sure all our pilots are signed up to it, and hopefully the word gets out that they are, and they do. But yeah, I think pretty good responses overall.
Good. Yeah, 50% of the attendance is pretty good.
Yeah.
Very.
All right, so I will turn it over
Now we turn it over.
to Aviation.
Okay,
To the
all
right.
right. Well, thank you, Ben, for having us here. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to provide you all with some information. Spoiler alert, we're not going to provide any conclusions here, but we're what our role here is to provide you with more information in terms of, we've got some information here on the surveys. We have started to collect some additional data, have, conducted some interviews with the tower, looked at some of the applications that we would normally look at when we are looking at a runway like this, in its application with respect to the FAA, with respect to CDOT and the like. And so this is very preliminary, but I think it's useful information for you all moving forward. Starting off with it, I guess maybe just as a degree to provide some situational awareness, Matt, you want to talk a little bit about the actual condition of the runway, and then we could talk more about some of the planning elements of it.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So yeah, runway 321, the last major rehabilitation was in 1988. Since then, there has been some maintenance projects, crack seal, fog seal. We did a minor mill and fill at the south end with one of the other projects, but in total, it has not been really rehabbed, even to keep up with the age, 34 years. CDOT Aeronautics comes out and does a tour around the state, tries to do it about every 3 years or get to every airport every 3 years or so. They did their last inspection in 2021, so just last year. There was a big section of the runway that got a PCI, pavement condition index score of 37. That's low, as the chart and the graphic shows. Green is good, yellow's getting bad, red, you're bad. So we're in the poor condition of pavement. They also do a predictor of the future PCI number, and it's just getting worse without a full depth reconstruction or a major rehabilitation. So, they're expecting by next year, it's getting worse. It's below 25. In 2026, it's below 10. In that range would probably be the time the airport would have to decide, do they feel comfortable keeping it open with the condition of the pavement without a major rehabilitation. So yeah, that was the next bullet. We've done reconstruction cost estimates. As everybody knows, things cost more. Construction costs more than it ever has. We were thinking closer to 8 million when we were starting to look at the CIP in 2015. We're thinking that's almost double at this point to do a full depth reconstruction of the full length of the runway. And that really is what's needed. I think that'll get you the life, 20-year life minimum. Doing a full depth reconstruction. I think there's sections that are beyond just doing a partial depth rehab at this point.
So is your chart showing that the north half of the runway is in the poor condition and the rest of it is, I guess, variable?
That is correct. So that's not our chart. That comes off of CDOT Aeronautics website. They have a great pavement condition website. You can look up any airport in the state. The company that put it together with them originally was Applied Pavement Technology. They do it around the country, but CDOT Aeronautics is somewhat unique that they fund it, they keep it up to date, and they have this great interface that you could go and look at. But yes, absolutely, the north end is in the worst condition. Like I mentioned, the far south end was rehabbed with the 12 right rehab project several years ago. And then, yeah, there's a couple of spots that are variable in there, but that several thousand feet on the north end is in very bad shape. And then as it crosses taxiway alpha, it's getting worse as well.
And mind you, again, the actual physical inspection was done in 2021. As Matt had mentioned, these are projections based on the model that they utilize. And that's what's reflected actually in this graphic. So it's actually kind of a neat interface. You can go in there and you can go year by year and see and watch how the pavement, can potentially degrade, over time. Another thing, Matt had mentioned or alluded to, and that is terms of, there will be a point that the airport's going to need to make a decision on how to handle that, the condition of the runway and where's the line of safety and liability and at what point do we need to make a tough choice. I will say that as I understand, neither the FAA nor CDOT will make that decision for you. That is the responsibility of the airport. They may come in and note it. They might put some sort of a tag on it, basically indicating that, that it's I don't know if they would actually use the word unsafe, but it'd be an inadvisable runway to be utilizing for safety considerations. But ultimately, that's the decision of the airport to make when they close it. We'll talk about it more in a second, but even if you were to close it on a temporary basis, there are implications associated with that in terms of if we were to have to close it in the short term and wanted to reopen it once it gets reconstructed, there's going to be some standards that are going to have to be met in order for the FAA to recertify it. And so once you, even on a temporary basis, close it, you trigger these other things that have to be factored into the reopening conversation. I did want to mention a couple other things on this slide, and that's just beyond just the pure engineering and the reconstruction. As we talked about the timing on this, and again, there's indicating a quote unquote failed condition by 2026. The estimate that we have in the CIP right now is identified in your current CIP for fiscal year 29 / fiscal year 2030. So, you know, we're even in just those pure numbers, we're talking about a 3-year gap between when we think it's going to, the projections going to be failed, when you may even have the potential of having the money, you know, available just on your own basic plan right now. The challenge with that then goes a little bit further into the actual funding eligibility component of things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, but in order for this runway to be eligible for FAA funding, there's some check boxes we need to look at, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. But just know that it's a crosswind runway is different than the primary runway. There's a higher threshold for the funding on that, and that's not the ideal circumstance, but just the general lack of funding availability, you know, for airports, the higher demands, the higher costs for pavement have all kind of conspired to create a prioritization within airports that, while even if a runway is eligible, a crosswind is eligible, you still may not get to the point where you're actually able to fund it because the amount of money that's available just isn't going to go far enough. And that's just that's a practical reality of the way things are working these days.
I was gonna say, just quick numbers, you know, even if you can find the funding, which looks like it's could be difficult for crosswind runway, I think we said there was about 6 takeoff and landings, or 1 a day. Is that correct?
I believe that's what it was.
So if you do that between, let's say you take the $12 million number, it's $33,000 per takeoff and landing.
That number's not even gonna be close, because if we were to start a reconstruction 3 years from now or later, that number's 15 to 20 million.
Yeah.
As the scalars keep going.
What's the annual FAA inspection? Is that called?
The 5010 inspection?
Yeah.
It's done every 3 years.
Is there an annual inspection?
We have a part
Yeah.
139.
139.
Right, yeah, sorry.
Is there can they come through and at some point, you know, despite the models and say, shut it down? Or
Again, as I understand it, the FAA themselves won't come in and actually say that, but they will note them and they will put some identifiers in the 5010 inspection and that indicate that the pavement is in, you know, poor to failing condition, FOD risk. They'll put some things on there that will dissuade people from operating, you know, on it. But again, ultimately, it's your runway, your responsibility, your liability, and they'll defer to that.
really, they wouldn't.
That's what I've been told, you know, but yeah, that's, yeah, it's a little surprising to me too, you know, right.
That's so un-FAA like.
And certainly they could, I think they could withdraw our part 139 certificate, which is
Well, there,
what that.
that's what yeah.
They are sticklers about signs and ARF response times and stuff like that. I don't know if runway condition has come up lately. But yeah, that could be an implication.
There's, I don't know, is this public? Are we, this gentleman in the back had a
Yeah.
comment, a question?
Usually they don't ask questions in the middle, but Daryl, something quick.
It's quick. With that runway being used so little, how does it deteriorate? Can you explain that to me?
Well, this gentleman over here can give it to you in spades, but
Yeah,
it's just weather.
yeah, weather's the sun will beat the asphalt up real bad.
Yeah.
And then when it's, I mean, whether it's not being used or not, it's, yeah, just the age of the pavement. Eventually the oils, you know, get out of it.
It's like the crack seal all the way down the asphalt is a good, and you know, as soon as there's a little water getting in any of those cracks, it's all over. It's right.
In the wintertime, the frost, you know, you have the freeze thaw, you know, cycles, it just deteriorates naturally over time.
What
The
An
FAA's,
estimate, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the FAA's, standard lifespan for pavement is 20 years. Now, certainly that can be extended in certain climates, and other climates it's less than 20 years, but it's always 20 years that the FAA is anticipating for a pavement life for anything that they put on an airport.
But do you have any estimates on what it would cost us a year to maintain the other two runways? Just track seal and all that?
That would be a good, I don't know it offhand. Okay, good question.
So just to finish up on a couple of these elements here on the funding, I'll talk about the eligibility component here in the next couple of slides. But again, there's the eligibility and then there's the likelihood. And that's kind of goes to what I was talking about earlier. Given the size of the dollar amount we're talking about here, that wouldn't be able to be funded by the airport's entitlements. It would have to be some sort of a discretionary grant that would have to be issued. Again, to get a discretionary grant, you're having to compete with other airports within the region, within the country, given the demands, throughout the country, across one runway, even for an airport as active as yours, is likely still not going to compete particularly well when it comes to other things that are, safety issues, safety areas, throughout the country, and, just maintenance of primary runways. So again, the eligibility and the funding likelihood are two elements here. And unfortunately, I would, I can't say for certain, but, the likelihood of it is probably not great for you to secure that funding within that. And if you think that CDOT might be able to be the white knight, and what they're generally going to follow what goes on with the FAA, they themselves also are, focusing on, from the primary runway out. Crosswinds do tend to fall at a much lower scale than most other pavements that are available.
I think, Ben, you shared last meeting or someone did from the airport that we tried to get accelerated funding based on a safety issue, saying crosswind runway is a safety issue, but it was denied on that basis.
Yeah, I think Brian would have brought that up.
Brian. So apparently we tried that angle and the FAA didn't agree that it's a safety issue, so they moved on.
Yeah, because they have some additional factors and criteria, and again, I will talk more about that in a second, but again, just as a reminder, almost never button something takes off. Absolutely, it's the nature of it. But again, just really quick, high level, as you all are aware, we're looking at it from the planning perspective. We're looking at all the planning ACs, the airport design requirements, everything else that gets factored into that. So when we look at that runway, it's not just that piece of pavement. It is all the ancillary safety criteria and setback requirements and RPZs and safety areas, object-free, OFC, all this crazy stuff that we have to look at in consideration of that runway. So just as a quick little bits of notes here, the runway itself is, it's 3,600 feet long, 75 feet wide. That length and width are based on something called the design aircraft, and that was something that was defined in the last master plan. That's defined through an analysis of the types of operations that are occurring on the runway. That helps actually drive some of those design standards I had kind of referenced there. It's currently identified as a B2. I'm happy to get in as much detail on this as you want. I'll try to keep it high level, but if you want to know what all it's all about, I'll do it, but I'm going to leave it to the side here for the moment. But it's a B2, but that's typically like a larger turboprop, maybe a small jet type of a smaller corporate jet. Pavement strength's good at 40,000, pounds for a single wheel, gear. A couple of other considerations, and this goes into some of the design elements. I just wanted to call out the fact that when you do have that crosswind runway, there's that purple dash line there. You have something out there called the runway visibility zone, which is an area that's supposed to be clear of everything, buildings, parked aircraft, regardless of whether it used to be just, clear when the tower was closed, but now the criteria has morphed into or changed to be clear all the time. So technically, with that crosswind runway, that runway visibility zone is an area that needs to be clear at all times. It's just another factor that plays into the impact of the runway.
The corner of this building is where it is because of that, as you can see.
Yeah, you can see this particular building.
Yeah, exactly right. Another factor that goes into it is, and this has been something that's been on the ALP for a while, is the taxiway Bravo. On the east side, if you were to follow the design criteria, is actually too close. The center line for that taxiway is actually too close, and it's been on the ALP for that taxiway to be relocated to meet design criteria. And that's something that's assuming on the far ends of the CIP, but that would be my speculation.
It's been grouped as one project, 321 rehab, Bravo removal, Charlie extension, but yeah, cost gets larger and larger, more pavement we're touching.
Right. We'll talk about more here in a second here. That separation is an issue for the existing design criteria. It actually is not actually if it becomes a smaller aircraft. So that's another factor that we have to balance all these little things when we start looking at future opportunities or options for that runway. Is that if you were to keep it at a certain size, it might have one level of implication. If you reduce it, it might reduce certain elements, but it's going to reduce its functionality and its usability as well. So those are some things that ought to be looked at, further down the line.
Do we know if there's been, or any of the pilots, is there a published approach for that runway? Is there a GPS approach? I've had,
It might be in our numbers.
That's a great question. I thought not. I thought I took a look at it, but I don't believe that there is.
I know there's
But
ILS.
Ben's looking at me like, I should know that. I'm like, questioning myself.
There's not.
It was.
Okay,
That's staying corrected.
Okay, thank you. As I mentioned, there's our runway protection zones, which goes to something I'll speak to in a second as well. Those are those yellow areas on the ends, those trapezoids. Those are important for the FAA in terms of especially for keeping congregations of people out of those areas, buildings out of those areas for obvious reasons. So I'll talk more about that here in a second. There are actually 3 hotspots on the airports, and these hotspots are things that are identified by the airport that are areas of special concern and consideration related to potential runway incursions or just areas that are higher safety factors. And the 3 that you have on the entirety of the airport are all related to this runway. One is just an operational, acknowledgement of all the helicopter operations on the north side, but hotspot 2 and 3 are both areas that have been identified that have the potential of having a higher propensity for runway incursions just because of the way that the taxiway system operates there. So there's potential that there might have to be some sort of work done down the line if with the runway to minimize the potential of there being runway incursions down there.
Is that because there's been incursions there or because of the potential for incursion?
It's going to be a combination of both. There's a national program that was established probably 10 years ago that was looking at runway incursions across the country. And so it's a combination of specific instances that may have occurred at an airport, but also then looking at instances that occurred at one airport, finding commonalities at other airports to identify, well, if it happened here, it's quite very well could happen at this other airport. In this particular case, I don't know what the origins of that are. It's just that when we do a master plan or do a heavy planning study on it, that is usually one of the big things that the FAA wants us to remedy. To the point, we're working on a master plan down in Colorado Springs. There's a hot spot with the converging runways. We've got what they call coupled runways, and we're looking at options of having to move whole runways in order to eliminate those hot spots and decouple those runways. So that's how important, there's the level of importance that the FAA looks at when it comes to these hotspots, which is the reason I just wanted to call that out with respect to this. And as I mentioned earlier, if the runway were to be closed, even on a temporary basis.
What is this comment down here? Says somebody says that HS2 is actively used, but that's just a hot spot. Does that mean?
Yeah, it's a public comment about hotspot 2 being actively used.
Sorry.
Yeah, I assume, so once a year we meet with the FAA control tower and the whole focus of it is on local issues and they always talk about hotspots. And every time I've attended it twice, I think, and both times they've had examples that year of, a student who turned off either on the runway when they're supposed to hit the taxiway or vice versa. So I think there are local examples every year. I know the tower, certainly they view it as, that's the reason it's highlighted as a hotspot is they do have issues there.
And as I mentioned earlier about the closing of the runway, even if it's on a temporary basis, even if it's a temporary basis, in order to, let's just say for argument's sake, you reconstruct the runway, everything goes, gets into compliance. There is a threshold when you want to open the runway, the FAA is more than likely going to want to make sure that everything is going to be meeting standards, and that would be related to the runway taxiway separation, compliance with the RPZs. If you look in that northern RPZ, it extends over into a public roadway. Well, technically, you're not supposed to be having public roadways in an RPZ, but the FAA will generally grandfather existing conditions to allow for those to continue to operate in that fashion, unless it becomes an overriding safety issue. In a situation like this, where if you were to temporarily close the runway and then try to reopen it, more than likely the FAA is going to say you need to meet all of these standards. You're no longer grandfathered when it comes to things like the RPZ. When it comes to things like the runway taxiway separation and the like, they're more than likely going to require you to meet those standards. So there'll be other implications associated with that, up to, shortening the runway, maybe to bring that back. Maybe it's the application of declared distances. There's a variety of things that we can do, but it's just not going to be as simple as, even if we got the money, reconstruct the runway, we're up and running again. If we close it at any degree, there's going to be more to it to get it up and running again. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Yes, sir.
Is there any type of grace period for the length of time? Can you close, let's say, for 3 months to do a repair and then just reopen it? Or does that drop dead start the minute you close it?
I can't give you a definitive answer on that. What I would say is that if that were going to be the case, we're going to close the runway on a temporary basis. We'd want to have, coordination and some communication with the state, with the FAA, to figure out what that might look like. Again, I'm being a little bit vague here on the meeting of the standards, but I think that the conservative way of going into it would be to assume that you're gonna have to meet those. Now, if it's just a 3-month, period, maybe we have some grace in that, but we would need to nail that down.
There must be something like that, Tony, because if we're doing repairs out there on the concrete occasionally, it's closed for at least a day or two, right? So there must be some.
Yeah, it must be
window that
some type
we're
of
talking about.
window.
Yeah, but that's very temporary. I think that what we're talking about here is there's really, it's not a permanent closure, in which case the runway goes away forever. It's temporary, not to the degree of what you would be reconstructing it. It's temporary for maybe an undetermined period of time. But maybe that goes to your question. There's a delineation there that maybe I'm not familiar enough with, that we would have to establish through communication with the FAA to figure out what that threshold would be. My speculation would be is if we're looking at just the years, the numbers we were looking at before, which is, say, as much as a 3 or better year lag.
Oh, sure.
Between that's not going to probably fall within that
Right.
shorter term window that they're going to consider. So then moving into some of the other specifics here, as I mentioned, eligibility, what we normally do from a planning perspective is one of the primary criteria that we utilize to establish what is eligible for funding by the FAA when it comes to crosswind runways is a wind analysis. We talked about, before that, when the winds do, favor that runway, it's I think it's reflected in the survey. It's important to have that. The way the FAA looks at that is we have to do a windrows analysis, and we look at it through various crosswind speeds. Without getting too far down to the details, basically what the FAA says, if you have 95% coverage on an existing runway of wind coverage for that runway, they consider that to be adequate to meet all crosswind criteria. When we run the analysis for your airport, the primary runways, their orientation satisfies the 95% criteria for all airspeeds, with the exception of 10.5 knots, which is at 94.08% coverage. So technically you are you're 0.82% deficient, on that. And what that 10.5 knot crosswind, means from a practical standpoint, and that's just the wind speed coming off and, abeam the aircraft in a crosswind, is that's more reflective that the aircraft that would be most susceptible to those types of crosswinds are going to be smaller general aviation aircraft, your single engine piston aircraft, tail draggers. Those are the aircraft that are going to be most susceptible to those types of crosswinds. larger aircraft, at 13 knots, 16 knots, 20 knots, they're not nearly as susceptible to those crosswinds, and we have appropriate coverage on the primary runways. From a practical standpoint, what that means is the FAA would look at that and say, okay, we see that you have a need for a crosswind runway for small aircraft, so the eligibility component of this is going to be limited, to a small aircraft. So even though we have a B2 as that your current design aircraft, our suspicions would be is that when we run this analysis, when we present this to the FAA, they're going to say, that's great, but you are eligible for an A1 small aircraft.
Which is what?
Which is again going to be a 60-foot wide runway, and then we'll have to do an individual runway length analysis. My guess is it's not going to be 3,600 feet. It's going to be more in the 2,800 feet. So they'll look to you and say, you don't need as much pavement strength, you don't need as much runway length, you don't need as wide a runway. We will give you this amount of, you're eligible for this piece of runway. And you're always, it's always up to discretion of the airport to put more in. You can build it out as as what you want, but the FAA is going to be limiting them, limiting the eligibility based on those criteria. As I mentioned earlier, we also talked, to the tower, had a couple of conversations with them, just a couple of nuggets that came from their perception of it. The current operational, the greatest current operational value of that runway at the moment is that of a taxiway, is how they view it. You've got Charlie, Bravo, and you've got the runway. You've got obviously the flight schools up. There's an awful lot of traffic moving back and forth. They tend to utilize that more as a taxiway as opposed to a runway. Given again the winds, they do use it when the winds are favoring that. They can, utilize that if it's requested, by a pilot. The challenge that they run into is that the level of activities that are currently occurring on the parallels are such that in order to work somebody into the pattern on a crosswind, if they want to use it, it's 20, 25 minutes at a minimum for them to be able to break out enough of a gap for that aircraft to get over there. So I think one of the comments was that, if it's, it's a challenge to have it being made available to them, well, there's a reason for that, just because the level of activities on the parallel runways are such that right now it's more difficult to try to work that aircraft, into a crosswind configuration. Again, they noted that, they estimate right now that about 1.5% of the total number of operations at the airport that occur on that. They believe that is also declining because as operations are growing at the airport, and again, those tend to favor the parallels. They see fewer and fewer operations on that runway. And again, the flight schools utilize the parallels and all that. In fact, when we talked about the potential future of that runway, honestly, their biggest concern is, well, yeah, the ideal circumstance is always for an airport to have a crosswind runway. That's always the ideal, but as far as the tower, the comment that the tower had made is that if for whatever reason that runway weren't available, we absolutely need to have some pavement over there for us to serve as a taxiway. We need to have the taxiway system configured. We can't lose that capacity. Now, does that mean you got to keep that pavement open? No, maybe there's some other things we can do from the planning perspective, but their primary concern is related to, accessibility in and out of that north area for taxiing aircraft. I think that's what I noted on here. Yeah, so upwards of 20 minutes and the like. What they also noted is that, when they do utilize the runway due to wind conditions, it's usually pretty high winds. It's, 30 knots or better, when it becomes the preferred runway. And from a practical standpoint, again, they say that if somebody does need to divert, what they do is they go to Erie or they go to Centennial. And I guess that, and I'll familiarize myself more with the wind patterns here, I guess, because we're up on top here, but then we're made for what, however, when the winds are really favoring the crosswind here at Erie, for whatever reason, the winds still permit utilizing, the paved runway at Erie. So what they usually see is, again, diversions either to Erie or they go to Centennial when that's required. But again, obviously, that's always at the pilot's, discretion. But that's how the typical operational patterns, work. He did note that, the folks that are most familiar with this runway will get themselves in regardless of the crosswinds and the like, just because they're very familiar with it. But certainly, you know, a runway isn't built just for the locals. It's always, it has to be, you know, standardized for everybody else. So that needs to be, you know, safe for everyone. Then moving in again, I mentioned earlier, about runway length, you know, it's 3,600 feet right now. You know, what the FAA is going to view for that runway is that being an A1 small. Just to give you a little bit of, you know, baseline in terms of the other types of aircraft that are operating on the runway or on the airport right now, anywhere from like, you know, your smaller, you know, corporate jets. Typically, they're going to need a minimum of 4,000 feet. Most of the time, we're looking at 5,000 feet for any turbine, you know, activity. So who can operate on there right now? You know, turboprops, you know, the small GA. My suspicion would be is that you know, getting a jet on there would be a very rare occasion. And that was validated actually by the tower, you know, as well. So just to give you a little baseline in terms of where you're situated. Now that red line at 36, in terms of the eligibility, is going to move it's going to have to move to the left when we talk to the FAA. More than likely, it's going to move to the left.
They're going to move it for us.
What's that?
They're going to move it for us.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, they're just going to say, well, you can have it as long as you want, but I'm only paying for this. And then just you know, wanted to touch base again on some of the key survey results. Again, you know, I don't think that these are unsurprising results. You know, 85% of the responses were single engine piston aircraft operators. 83% of those users or those operators utilized 321 because of the winds, just like we talked about. You know, the usage of that runway is not particularly robust, but then, as you said, you know, when you need it, you need it, and that's why it's important. So it's not unreasonable, even if it's not being utilized on a really regular basis, that when you want it, you know, you're going to want to have it there, and so it's important, you know. But again, there's, you know, discussions that need to be had in terms of what I think somebody mentioned, essentially kind of the value aspect of that for operations. So current options, you know, for us, and again, we're just going to provide this information to you, and then these are probably some directions we might recommend that we explore moving forward, because there's no conclusions here. It's just kind of an ongoing conversation. Is that you have an option of trying to maintain the runway as a B2 runway, which is basically 3,600 feet, 75 feet wide. You know, we can look at what the options may be for timing, funding. You know, some of those questions that you had asked in terms of what's that span, if we had to close it, what would that actually mean? We could certainly try to, you know, explore and get a little bit more information on that.
So certainly, any option that considers eliminating the runway should factor in any taxiway building that would be required
Yes.
to replace the pavement, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Because you still have operators up there, still need to get people in and out of it, you know, so, but if you're looking at that area though, as well, you've got 2 taxiways running into that area along with the runway. And for convenience sake, as I understand from talking to the tower, it's just more convenient to run those aircraft in almost as a one way in, one way out for all the flight activity rather than running over to Charlie.
Yeah.
But to your point, absolutely, that would have to be looked at because that's really one of the factors and considerations that are being brought up. So again, you can maintain the runway as it is or look at maintaining it as it today. We don't probably hold out an awful lot of hope of getting, you know, the level of funding eligibility that we'd be hoping for. We could potentially reduce the runway down to meet that future A1, which is probably more along the lines of the funding eligibility realistically. But will that money filter down far enough to get to hit you guys and in the time that you're looking for? I mean, that's anybody's guess.
It's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
We're thinking also, whenever we're talking these options, right, it includes taking care of Bravo to make it compliant versus where it is now. All of our, when we're talking about any of these options to rebuild, that has to happen.
It does. And again, if you're looking at maintaining the B2 one, then Bravo absolutely has to be factored into it. If it goes down to an A1, then maybe Bravo doesn't have to be factored into it. But now we're also reducing the size of the footprint. There's going to be costs associated with that as well. So each one of these has got individualized costs that are associated with. Some of them are meeting design standards, some of them, well, in meeting, the RPZ on B2. If they say we have to meet the RPZ, well, that's a whole other can of worms that we're gonna have to get ourselves into. If we were to move it down to an A1, that we're only gonna be eligible for a smaller runway, so some of that RPZ comes in, that RPZ might get a little bit smaller. We might be okay with it. But then you start asking yourself, okay, well, for that amount of investment, is the A1, the A1 small aircraft level of activities, is that enough to warrant those efforts? And then you do look at opportunities, or you look at both the challenges and the opportunities from the potential of the decommissioning of the run. And there are gonna be challenges. There's gonna be, when those winds are howling and the pilots are typically, used to being able to have that access. Having to go to Erie, having to go to Centennial is certainly inconvenient, and it's totally not the ideal, circumstance. You're operating here, you want to be here. So that would certainly be an issue. The challenge related to closing of that runway, and how do you maintain your taxiway flow in and out for the tower? That has to be looked at. But, for anything, for those challenges, we would have to identify those. But conversely, there's always opportunities that get presented when things change. As things change, there's always some opportunities that are being presented itself, especially when you're looking at, land on an airport that becomes available for redevelopment, for reuse, for whatever that functionality is. And so that gets all factored into the equation. So, again, this is not a definitive determination or anything. It's just presenting you with some of the general facts as we see them right now.
It does certainly feel though that we have a big decision that's pending quickly, because the money's big and the condition is deteriorating quickly. And so this is not something to push off very long. It's pretty quick.
So we just chew it up and make a grass stove kit.
Get that carbon, bring it up, get some sheep out there.
It seems to me, when you look at sort of the practical details, a decision seems maybe more straightforward than if you think of it at a more strategic level. And in terms of, what do we want this airport community to consist of? And, do we just want to go upmarket, or do we want to provide facilities and operations for flight schools and, smaller general aviation aircraft? So, and I think we have to think at it both at that strategic level as well as the practical level. The costs and, number of operations.
Let me bring up, for the pilots here, we all know that when these winds get up at 15, 25 knots around here, there's more than just a crosswind. It's a lot of turbulence. So some of these airplanes that think, well, I come in here and I'll get the crosswind, the turbulence, and it changes. It's not like we get just a straight down.
Yeah, the gust factor.
Yeah, the gust factor. So I'm not sure even if you have it, and the crosswind is available, a lot of pilots will use it because it really is a handful when that is gusting in.
Yeah, 30 knots on the wind for most of the way.
And the other point you make about general aviation, typically general aviation rides along with commercial aviation. It does not pay its way. And fuel, if we had to rely only on general aviation, we don't have the fuel taxes we need. We don't have enough revenue from our leases. This is a big asset that would be available to develop and help general aviation. We do not have enough parking spaces. I think, Ben, we're out of, right?
Fly downs, yep.
Yeah. In fact, you take Mountain Aviation over here, and Greg has trouble. He has people flying in here to get their planes fixed. He has nowhere to put them. He has to shuffle them in, borrow hangars, and drag them around. So that's a big problem. I mean, that's not going to help general aviation, doesn't help the businesses here. So the money that can be generated from some of the other uses, this is a huge asset, will help pay for a lot of these things. It can extend the amount of parking spaces we have for cars. It can expand it for a terminal. They can expand it for more hangar space. We haven't built any new hangars here in a long time. And the reason we don't, because we've got about $4 million of deferred maintenance then for the hangars we have now in general aviation. And we don't have enough revenue from those to pay that. And so it keeps getting worse. We can't even keep up without. So, we'd have to raise our rates about 40% on our hangar rates and lease rates in order to start raising enough revenue to keep up with the deferred maintenance that we have. So the other side of that is very important, looking at what this would bring for crosswind landing versus what that asset will bring for all general aviation and everybody else on the airport.
That's what we already heard. I mean, I thought it was a fairly known, I don't want to say fact, but position that the flight schools don't use that one. It's, they're just not gonna go.
Those ones are too high for a flight school to be operated.
Right.
Yeah.
They're gonna be here. That, if the parallels aren't available, they're done.
And tailwheel aircraft, I mean, haven't flown a tail wheel for years, but that's a handful anyway. Let alone,
I wouldn't be out there.
except for maybe Daryl.
Just
Look
there.
at that now.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean Boyd down. That's about, tailwheel, I'd say it's a handful,
It's 15 for me.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, but it's a handful on just a straight downwind, let alone turbulence and high crosswinds.
15 is the blind max.
I would just say that in talking with the airport administration, I know that their desire is to map this out for you all, so you can see what those choices are. Again, our intent here was just to provide you with a high level overview of what we see at this point, but I believe the desire is for us to drill a little bit deeper into it, maybe get a little more specific operational data, and to give you some more, hard numbers. That'll be good to you and Mr. Hansel.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed that, as we talked to Phil. I think the ideal is, there's a recommendation from this group, maybe in the next meeting, about what direction we should take this future study to really kind of dial in on what our CIP should look like, either short-term and long-term. We meet yearly with CDOT and the FAA to discuss it. It's coming up here, I think, in October this time. But then, if it's not addressed this year, it's gonna need to be addressed next year. It's gonna be coming soon, as mentioned.
One of our jobs, board members, and especially pilots, is to talk and communicate with the community here, the pilot community, what they want. Now, in the last week or so, I've had several discussions with my friends, which only have two of them, and a lot of pilots on this airport, and they're very adamant about, you got to keep it, they got to keep it. But they're not looking at the economics of this. This is a business. The airport is supported by itself, not by the county. All this has to be done through revenue. And we must continue creating revenue to help everything. And this helps general aviation. I hear that we don't care about general aviation. All we care about profit. Well, there is no profit. We have revenues exceeding expenses. And then we have places to put that revenue. And that's what we're talking about in the future.
What's your thought in terms of how you turn that real estate into revenue, into a revenue generating asset?
Well, I think we've already started commercial aviation with JXS or whatever it is. They're going to grow. We're going to need a terminal to grow that. We need more. Here's a unique thing that's going on right now. Normally, when you see an economic downturn, high inflation, what happens to the airport? In the past, they've always died off. Everybody quits flying, and now they find themselves in trouble because nobody's coming out. It's unique right now because of the pilot shortage that we have so many people training, and they continue to train, which is unusual for this type of economic condition. So we need to help support the flight schools, give them more spaces to put airplanes on. Now, and again, all this is against the carbon, the noise, but that's not our main interest. Our interest here as a board is how we grow and maintain this airport so that 20 years from now, the hangars will be painted, the roofs will be fixed, we'll have more parking spaces, more hangars. And this is a big chunk of land that can be developed. And I know Ben and his group and Paul got some ideas how this will really increase our revenue. And when you talk about $33,000 per landing, guys, we can just give them the money and they can get a bigger airplane over here. That's kind of like the tuition relief bill.
They're doing all right.
Yeah. So I'm a big proponent of closing it and figuring out the best way to create the most revenue and grow this airport. And general aviation comes along with it. In fact, it's already has. And, I get this from my friends also. you know, with the new FBO up here, do you think our fuel prices here for general aviation would be as low as they are if we only had one FBO? Absolutely not. Since we brought those in, we've raised money. We have 24-hour coverage here now, Ben, right? We didn't have before. That benefits general aviation. We have, what, 3 new snow plows that came in only because we have revenue from general, commercial aviation. The jet fuel amounts to what, 70% of our income?
About that.
About 70% of the income. So from that, we put in new snow removal equipment. This helps general aviation. Otherwise, this airport would be closed in a snowstorm and they couldn't use it. So when we develop the commercial side, it rolls over helping the operations for all the private side. And like I say, I get a lot of discussion. I was attacked by some people at the, I'm just kidding. Yeah. At the diner the other morning, we were having quite a discussion.
I didn't attack you. We were having a discussion.
That's good. It was good discussion.
Yes, it was.
Okay. So that's really our decision. I mean, when you look at what, and that's a great presentation today of what it's going to cost, what we could use on this cross runway. I don't think any business decision. I own my own business. I had 5 plants overseas. And this would be an easy one in a private business. Okay. This is an asset that's not performing that could help us build this whole airport.
That's absolutely true.
So
That comparison doesn't exist here really, but it's true. It's a
Yeah.
very underutilized asset.
Well, even if there were some counter arguments to what Randy just said, right or wrong, it's very unlikely that we're gonna find the $15-20 million to do it.
That's the real
So
question.
it just doesn't even, to me, it becomes a moot point. Secondly, from what I've heard from the flight schools, which I think is the biggest piece, I agree 100%, biggest piece of growing general aviation provided a function here is if we can help the flight schools provide that and create more pilots. I have, in the several meetings I've sat through where this has been a discussion, I haven't heard one solid argument other than, look, I've got a Cirrus, but I've also got a tail dragger, and, you know, probably just not gonna fly it. Now, I fly my Cirrus for business, so I'm not looking for the nice days. I fly it 250, 300 hours a year. I'm landing here when I have to, not for wins, and I've still never landed on 3 or 2-1. I've landed in some bad winds over 30 on the crosswind. I would rather have a nice wide runway out here to deal with it than.
I've been flying out here for 48 years, got all my advanced ratings here, and I think I've used it maybe 3 times, 48 years.
What kind of airplane do you fly?
Now,
Then,
then, well, my last one was Piper Malibu. So,
there you go.
but before that, I've flown all kinds of airplanes out here, 172s, Grumman's, 182s, Pipers, Comanches. I mean, I've flown all the time, and I still only 48 years have used it a couple times.
Is that the real number of one landing a day average?
That's what we,
It works out to be about 10, 1.5.
Experts, yeah, I
It's
think it's
600, it's about
Jeffco.
10 a day, it's 3,600 a year.
3,600.
Yeah, doing the math, I don't know where the 33,000 came from, but if you,
that's
let's
what
just,
we had.
It's
my bad.
if you had, just so that we're kind of talking the right numbers here. If you have a $20 million investment that lasts 20 years, that's $1 million a year, call it. And you have 3,600 operations per year, that works out to be about $275 per operation. So it's a number. It's not, it's not 33,000, but it's a number.
Thank you. I mean, it is, and that's certainly a better number than 33,000, but I think the real question is, do those operations justify the 20 million?
Yeah, that's
It's the opportunity cost. What do you do with the 20 million if not?
Yeah, that's
this?
right. And actually, I think that should be considered. I think we ought to understand what is the highest and best use for the property, so that we're making, a good comparison.
Yeah, I think that understanding the development opportunities and what that brings to the airport, to me, that would help solidify the direction. I think the direction is kind of it's kind of cast. It's kind of cast, but I think more importantly, if you go to the next step, again, I think like Randy said, is if this was a private business valuation or analysis, it would be simple. I'd say, okay, what's A, B, and C of what we would do there? And what does it look like? Or I don't care if it's the airport administration saying it's just A, here's what we think is the right thing. But I think we ought to understand. I think the other component besides the flight schools is understanding hangar space here. If we want to keep GA going here, we've got to be able to continue.
Park airplanes.
I can tell you my hangar rent this year went up 250%. I don't have a choice. I have nowhere else to go. I just have to pay it. So I think we got to be thinking about how to get hangar space here, how to have opportunities for planes to be here, because it's supply and demand. And right now, there is no supply for hangars, and the demand's driving prices to where I don't think anybody's gonna be able to afford a hangar here.
Well, you said 36 a day? I don't think there's any way we have 36 landings.
No, there's 600 operations per day. 1.5% of that makes about 10 on average.
Yeah, and I don't think they use it 10 times a day.
That's just
In
what.
fact, I just the numbers. That's just the numbers.
My office window looks out on 321, and
How many-
granted, I'm not here after 5 or after 7 or 8 when the tower's closed, or before they open in the morning, and maybe that's when some of the operations, but it is very notable to see any aircraft using it. during
But
the day.
those numbers are reported by the FAA. I think we got the 1.5%.
And those are very much subjective numbers. Those are not hard numbers. I think that what we would propose to do as part of this effort is to get actual numbers and get real ADS-B data to find out exactly.
And I'm sure it's not spread out. I mean, there are certain days where
Let's
the
get it
numbers.
concentrated on
Yeah,
those
right.
days when the rents are there.
That 1.5% again is very much, you know,
I've flown 1,200 hours here in the past 5 years out of this airport. I have never heard anybody request a takeoff. I'm not saying there are.
I've used it once.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, I've been here 25 years and I think I can think of 4 times that I used that runway, and each time, you know, was an event.
You were happy it was there?
I was happy it was there, but that's, you know, I don't know. I'm kind of, you know, whatever, 300 hours a year. I don't know how many takeoff and landings I do, so I'm probably well below 1.5%. But
In 20 operations, I mean, who wants to invest in a Kool-Aid stand with 20 people showing up?
I mean, when you go to the recommendations page, just, you know, see, right, you got 3. Basically, you're asking for a study regardless, but you're asking which of the 3 studies you want to be done.
Yeah, what initial guidance you'd give staff and us and our engineers to kind of really flesh out what we're thinking going forward.
But regardless of
VIP.
which one, it's a study. It's not the final product.
I think, yeah, no matter what, we're gonna have to take a closer look at this.
But you don't want that vote until next month. I mean, it seems like it's a no-brainer.
That was my
That
direction.
number 3 is the study that everyone around this table would like to see
Yeah.
done.
Well, we've already done one,
Okay.
generally. I mean, we could refine it, right? We could say, okay, we're saying right now it's 15.
That's for option 1 above, right? That number is gonna be higher, but it's for that option.
15, 20, okay.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. If we want to refine that so that we understand in fairness what that really is, I think it would be good to understand the FAA numbers if we could get those really, if they have any numbers over there of how many actual landings are on.
we have to collect those
Yeah.
individually. We can set something up to collect.
Ben's our best source.
Yeah,
They are not counting per runway, they're
Right.
operating.
That's not the way that they, yeah.
okay.
But I would say, we're showing 3 options up here. If we were to do a study on this, we would touch on each of the 3. I mean, you know, because we'd want to be able to map out specifically on 1, keep it B2, you know, what's the pros, what's the cons, you know, what are the actual facility implications associated, likely facility implications associated with it, and what are the very rough, order of magnitude type of costs associated with that. Same with the A1 small, and then we would, you know, drill in a little bit into the challenges and opportunities of the decommission.
I mean, from my standpoint, I'd love to see 1 refined. Have you guys show us what 2 might look like. It's probably gonna be an extrapolation. And then have the airport administration lay out to us what you guys would see
where we would go on?
It sounds like what you're talking about this evening, option one is kind of a red herring anyway. Because we don't, the FAA is not gonna help us build any more than option two. We don't have the other 10 million to
Well,
go further and.
but if we're gonna develop it into something else, we have to have funds to do that as well, right? So, yeah, I mean, so,
Not necessarily, because if you're right, if you're doing something where
you have private.
Yeah,
right, funding's coming in with whoever's building, whatever the thing
Yeah,
is.
I think that's important to sort of understand what the opportunities are and by default, what the opportunity costs of not doing something are. It's, because you can just let it go, right? And, you go 5 years and then at some point you just say, okay, now it's just too bad and we put paint.
We're on that track. That's the
Yeah,
track.
right, but,
Right.
so.
well, if we make a wish list, a 10-point wish list of things that we need at the airport and a cost factor, what's most important? I doubt when you lay them all out, hangars, parking spaces, all this stuff, terminal, that runway won't end up on the top.
Yeah, we
line.
just have to get past, that level of opinion without, something objective to base it on. So if we have something objective to compare, then I think, it gets easier.
I think that's the next step we're at. And
Yeah.
that's why Paul didn't want to make a decision. That's why we're having a discussion to talk about those next steps.
Ben, I'd like to add something if I could. I think these studies are going to be beneficial. I want another study showing what we're going to lose if we take this action as far as our general aviation. Because for every action, there's a reaction.
Would we lose a flight school because they don't have that runway? Is that the kind of question you're asking?
I want to see it. I want something to show me what the adverse effect would be.
Mhm.
Or if there is one.
Might be. I hear that. That sounds like important. It's hard to prove a negative though. If we close that runway.
I don't-
Do tenants leave? That's
I
the
don't think
question.
it is.
What?
I don't think in this case it is. You're talking about a base that got you to where you are today.
Would you do that as a survey to the community, or how would you do that study?
I'd want to see numbers.
How would you get those numbers?
Well, you
What's the-
start with the survey. You would start with the survey to your general aviation base. What effect would it have? What would be their recourse should this airport go that direction? And
Yeah, I think that could
The
be an
numbers,
interesting
Would you
follow-up
relocate?
survey,
would you relocate?
right? And maybe give them other options as well as, if you didn't have this runway, are there, what would benefit you? Hangars or, like you could, more tie downs, so some kind of a follow-up survey could be interesting and then tie in, Tony's request as well as to, how that would impact their.
25% of the survey said it didn't matter at all.
And we did talk about adding
That's
those
right.
things in this initial survey, and we didn't, because we wanted this first survey to be more objective around.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. I mean, but now, now you have that, it seems like you've triggered something that would allow you to do a follow-up.
And again, the decommissioning the runway, yeah, it would offer likely some opportunities, but as we noted, I mean, there are challenges, no doubt. I mean, the ideal circumstances is to have a cross one runway. Lose that, to your point, what are the implications associated with that, be operational or for tenants or the requirement for, diversions and the like. But I think it's important to identify what those are, so everybody's looking at it, from an apples to apples perspective. Here's, behind door number one, you get this, door number two, you get this, door number three, you get that.
I think it's possible to quantify a lot of that simply by, ADS-B data or however you get true use of that runway and by factor in what percent would not be able to complain.
And one thing I did want to clarify, you mentioned Malibu, I guess, and Malibu is an A1 small aircraft. So my point of bringing that up is simply that just because it's a smaller aircraft doesn't mean you still can't operate it, obviously, in a crosswind condition in the parallels. you know, just because it's
I've
crosswind.
done 40 knots on the parallels.
Right, well, right, exactly. So like, so the standards that the FAA uses are generalized standards.
And I've been, I
And-
go into 3,500.
So, yeah, it doesn't mean that you can't do that. It's just that that's the threshold by which they say, you know, you're eligible for a crosswind. So, you know, as you know, you're not precluded from operating on the parallels.
Ben, what was the, return rate on this survey that you did?
200?
Yeah, we had 200
Percentage-wise.
responses out of 1,700 contacts that went out to. But like I mentioned, I would just guess half of those contacts were actual pilots, who probably fly out of here. A lot of those are just local community and business owners or whoever else who works out here.
Okay, so I got down, maybe I'm wrong. You sent out 400?
1,700.
The 400 tenants on.
Okay, 400
Yeah.
Aircraft operating.
on.
You're gonna have those.
Between 400 500 based aircraft here. There's more pilots than that because there's people who rent from the
Okay,
place.
so you got 200, response to 200
Yeah.
or 1,700 sent out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like I said, I think probably a lot of those people said, I'm not a pilot, delete. So to me, this is a pretty good response rate for most surveys that you would send out, because I think we do have a pretty engaged general aviation population here who were probably eager to take this survey.
I mean, it's almost 12%. And usually when we do a lot of, you know, outreaches, I mean, we're getting 2-3% on survey. responses.
Statistically, if you're inside 4 or 5%, that's a valid study.
5% is valid.
Right, that's
5% and over is valid.
That's where you are, so it's, for our tenants, it's a good survey. Can't really speak too loudly about anybody else, but that's our primary, that's our constituent.
And heavily GA.
Yeah, that's our constituent, that's who we're talking about. Other questions for the team here? Yeah, what we've been tasked with is to absorb this information. We want to do another survey with a little bit more granularity that says if the cost of keeping the runway is becoming exorbitant. So if it were to go away, how would that impact you? If we wanted to send one of those out? You know, would you leave RMMA? Would you operate obviously they'd operate the aircraft less, so if the wind is out of that direction.
I think my recommendation there would be we hold off on a second survey so that we don't
Yeah,
alarm people that this is imminent. Since this is still just going to be kicking off a further study.
Okay.
And then weighing in on a CIP. You know, I do think if we send out next week, I think the story would be AAV decided the runway's closing. You can tell, you know, it's.
It would be, yes, that would
It would
be,
be alarming.
that would be received that way.
Also survey fatigue, but you know, we can do it. If
Well,
we decide to.
all Paul asked in his absence is that we, coming to the next meeting in October, that we give him our best estimate of which of those options is most likely best one for the airport. That there's a lot of work that has to happen.
What's the process on that? Does that require BCC approval or is it an in-house
It
implementation?
would really just reflect by changes in our CIP with what we're doing. And then depends, let's say you go option 3 and we're closing it. There needs to be discussion on, does the airport remediate that, tear up the concrete and make it developable ground? Or is that something we just market through an RFP for development?
But
I
that's
think
all-
there's a lot of models.
All after.
That's all. That's all.
Eventually the BCC would get involved, but right now it's mainly, it affects what we think of in terms of our AIP, CIP.
So our recommendation in October will be taken under advisement by the staff.
Yes.
That doesn't even mean the runways would be closed in the next couple of 3 years while we're maintaining the pavement, but it would put, you know, it would go in motion that it will be closed at some point if that's the track we take.
My only concern is that we have all the pertinent information needed to make an informed decision. And at this point, I don't see us having it within that time period. This is a major decision. And to think that we can all come back together in 30 days and make a decision that's going to set probably the next 10 to 15 years at the airport here.
Well,
I-
we are an advisory
Realistic.
board, so we're gonna give them our best opinions on what to do. It is still their decision.
And that's true.
So,
If we make this decision next month, it is, it's just that, an opinion.
that's right.
And I will point out one other thing that I face as we talk about development on the airport. That runway visibility zone is a real thing impacting current tenants out here in the airport. Signature's leasehold, where those kind of two orange hangars are.
Right.
They cannot put another hangar there.
Right, goes right through the ramp there.
And technically, there's kind of a fascinating thing. In theory, there's not even supposed to be parked aircraft there. Right, we turned a blind eye to that and hope we don't have any issues with the FAA.
Yeah.
But when when there's a 737 parked out in front of the terminal, they're technically violating our RVZ. But, knowing the future of this runway, whether it's a smaller one that would change that, or whether it's decommissioned, will allow those leaseholds to start thinking about how they develop their properties.
And that should be identified within the opportunities we're talking about. That, sure, that is, to your point, Ben, that is a real implication there. And while that has been acceptable from a grandfather perspective, again, if we close it, we are gonna, all bets are off.
Sure.
So,
And to Tony, to your point, I think we can make a recommendation with a lot of caveats, because, this is what it feels like right now, but we don't have a lot of the data that we would want to have if we were the decision-making body. I think you can do that, or you can abstain if you don't feel comfortable with that. If Paul doesn't take the next step, right, when he comes up with his CIP revision here at the end of the year, it just rolls into next year's decision-making. The concrete's just getting worse and worse with pavement. So that's why he's pushing it a little bit. It's already too far down the list.
I was gonna say.
We're already kind of in a tight spot because of
Last spring, maybe it was, or early
Yep.
summer.
And every fall is when it's reviewed and kind of reset.
But you guys presented.
right, and it was.
And it was, that's a scary list.
Yeah, and everything on that list ahead of that seemed pretty important to us and to you guys, obviously. So it's almost we're painted into a little bit of a corner here just because of the other things on the priority list.
Yeah, and these conversations will help us with the FAA because they have their own opinions on what should happen to this airport, and knowing what you guys think will help us kind of have those discussions with them.
Real quick observation is that if we were sitting here with a big bucket of money that was unlimited and we were making this decision, we would look at it fairly differently. We could study this further, we could look at impacts, we could reach out, find out input from all kinds of people, surveys, studies, whatever. We don't. And so, to me, sending out a survey and asking people what they do if this was taken away and all of that information, if we can't even do it, just creates
Just get that.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. So there's something. So to me, we ought to decide first, if we don't see a path to rebuilding this runway as B2 or whatever, B2 or A1, then isn't the answer kind of made? Now where it's, what do we do?
Well, I guess, I guess I'm still trying to understand the urgency in the decision as well, right? It's just gonna get worse, but if we don't do anything this month, it's not gonna be that much worse than it was this month, right? We don't have to make that decision right now that we're gonna go tear that runway.
So I think Paul kind of addressed that last month because of the CIP plan that they're trying to do for the next 10 years, of whether this is included in what they submit this year, if it's not, something else.
Right.
I guess that's my point, is they can not include it. I guess I understand is if there was urgency to saying, listen, we absolutely want to raise the priority of that, then it becomes urgent. But it feels like nobody is convinced that that is a priority for us. So now the secondary decision is, how long do you just ride this out or tear it out and reinvest in something new? And what is that?
Yeah, and that decision is not,
And so it feels to
As
me
urgent,
like
for
we
sure.
can get to a decision on, that that's not our highest priority
Not a potential
within a
plan.
month.
right, and that's really, that's
Yeah.
well stated. That's framing it correctly.
And the trick is, we project this to be failing before we get the CIP
Before we
money
get paid.
for it, as it's currently programmed. So if you decide it is a huge priority, it means more, sooner CIP projects are gonna have to adjust and move.
Yeah, you gotta go back and look at the whole thing now and what is not gonna happen.
And I thought that was the urgency around it, as Paul explained last month, was either we've got to commit to this and move this up, or we've got to abandon it. That's how I heard it. I know he's not here to say that, but that was the urgency I heard him say.
I think that you're saying the same
Yeah.
thing. He's saying if we don't say that it has to be done, we're gonna spend the big money, pull it forward. If we don't say that, then we can go explore the other options because it's getting pushed out further. The decision is gonna stay out further.
I mean, you go through this process every year, so there's always a possibility that somehow, the world could change and that could, and the priorities could change again, but.
Anytime you delay a decision that's pretty obvious, you lose an opportunity. And that's my concern. Can't just put it off a year, we'll look at it again. There's people that want to develop, come into this airport. There's some people that want to build hangars at this airport. So
I agree with Tony that we won't be prepared within a month to know how to develop that.
well, that's not what we're saying. We're saying, do we make the decision that is going to be developed or not? And get rid of the runway. I mean, all you can do is talk to the flight schools. They're the ones that'll guarantee you they want more, tie downs. They don't use the runway. They would like more hangars. Okay. I think the airport wants more revenue, right? And that's what this does.
Take it.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
And in a month, we're only voting on which study to do. None of it's binding,
It's direction to staff to be thinking about what.
because there's still a ton of work that has to go, no matter which of the three studies.
Yeah.
We're saying, which study do we want to go pursue?
Yeah.
Right, because ultimately, for you to make that decision, you need to have the information that you're asking for. You need to know what the operational numbers are. You need to know what the challenges are, where the opportunities lie. This is all very high level right now. We're not asking, nobody's been asking anybody to make a decision based on just this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think what we're discussing tonight is what's the process to make decisions going forward, as opposed to what's the decision on that road.
Yes. Okay, Ben, so what else do you need from us? It was a lot of great information, good dialogue, good discussion. But
I think we can bring a draft recommendation to the next, to the October meeting, and I did make some notes on other kind of requests for data we can try and flush out. But, yeah, this was a good discussion.
And Ben, can I ask, is there any possibility that we receive that data ahead of time? I mean, like 10 or even 2 weeks before? I mean, the discussions we're having to get data the day before or at the meeting and then say, okay, what's the decision?
Yeah.
I just think it's irresponsible.
Yeah, we can send out this presentation and the survey results, so you have those as well, and then work with you to send out some sort of recommendation.
Do we want to hear from Daryl?
You guys have answered it tonight.
okay, thanks.
All right.
I did, I'd ask.
So I think before you adjourn, I'd actually like to comment on something that our community commenter, Josh Cooperman, said. So, I think that, that there was a lot there. One thing that was pretty interesting to me, and I think, sustainability is important, and it's going to become more important to the community and our constituents. And the one thing that kind of stood out to me that I thought might be worth exploring is this resource with InRail that partners with airports to help develop
Yeah, I've heard of it.
sustainability plans. And I think that might be worth a phone call to, find out what,
I think it
what
would-
help might be available to us and, I mean, that,
And there's, we'll talk offline, doesn't have to be this meeting, but there are ways to offset your power usage with
Right.
solar farms that, without putting panels on roofs that are blind pilots.
yeah, I mean,
We don't want to create that hazard.
I mean, there's a
But
ton
there's
of,
ways to do this.
Yeah, I
that
mean-
Can be explored.
I mean, there's a bunch of really, cool things going on in the industry with respect to new technology, both in fuels and aircraft power that, gets us on a more sustainable track from an environmental perspective. But there's other things that are not aircraft related that we might be able to do that, just to be good stewards of the community.
I agree. So,
I don't think we answered his question last time about the low lead. And again, we're governed by the FAA and the aircraft of what they could use. And, I'd like to say we're all for the no lead as soon as it's possible.
as soon as
Yeah,
it's
there-
available.
There's been some pretty interesting news on that just in the last 10 days where the G100UL SDC was approved for all piston engine aircraft by the FAA, yeah. So, they're in discussions now with blenders. This is GAMI is in discussion with blenders and distributors, as to how to start rolling that out. And with that FAA approval, that will get the wheels turning. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody wouldn't want to use it when it's available to us. So, and it is coming.
Yeah.
It's on the way.
Well, and importantly, nothing we can do to hurry it up.
No,
That's right.
Not at this
That's
stage.
right.
Out of at least this room staff.
Yeah, I think that's, not something that we can affect, but it is, it is good news for the industry.
Absolutely, and for the environment. Okay. We'll call it adjourned, a half hour late, but thank you for the lively dialogue, important stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thank you for all the
Yeah, thanks
information.
for having us.
It's been, will it be October 12th?
Yep.
I won't be here for that.
Second. Okay.
Oops.